Okay, hello, welcome everybody to another Indypod Extra from the Scottish Independence podcast team. If you saw, one of our earlier shows was called Media Politics, and we were chatting to John Robertson, who does Talking Up Scotland blog. Well, this time we thought we'd get a journalist's eye view. Laura Pollock from The National kindly agreed to come along and chat with us. Here's that conversation.
Yeah, great. So Media Politics, a journalist's eye view. Fiona and I bumped into you a couple of times at various indie events, so it was nice chatting to you there and nice to have you with us. What's your role at The National?
Yeah, so my role is the grassroots reporter. That is not the job title. I don't think that could have got on the contract, but I talk to mostly the yes groups and the activists involved with the political parties, all to do with independence and talking on the ground really to the folk who are out at the stalls and at the marches and the ones who are trying to convince the undecided. So it's a brilliant job. It's, I like a chat and I studied history at university. So to actually be on the ground, and I always do see people doing this and seeing it in the point of view that, you're part of history.
Yeah. Totally.
No matter what chapter or how important it is, you're there and you're doing something to do with your country. So I do see it as such a privileged position to be reporting on it.
That's a really good way of putting it, actually.
Yeah.
That gets me as well.
Yeah.
We're possibly part of history. We're doing something.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, things like this. I mean, this is recorded, and you never know what archive it'll turn up in. And I remember my first, maybe not now as much, but my first few articles, I thought, because as someone who studied history, I'm thinking, will this get referenced somewhere at some point? Will this be a source? So it's great.
Oh, it's good. So, is there any particular articles or reports you've done that you just look at and think, oh, that was a really good one? I really enjoyed that one.
Two pop out of my mind. The first was, I think it was one of the first Yes groups I visited. It was Yes Carrick down in Strayton. It was Gordon Ferry had got in touch, and he had just said, this is what we do. We have just started Yes Carrick, and every Sunday we meet at this cafe and we do the quiz in the Sunday National. And from a point of view of being a publisher, that's a great story for us.
Yeah.
The paper's bringing folk together, they're doing the quiz. But on the other end, I was like, that's amazing. That's so wholesome. It's this, and then I went down and visited them, and it's this village that is, when I went, it was very cloudy. It was very, the fog over the fields and just this one street village. And inside it was a warm, cozy cafe, people talking about the Constitution of Scotland. And I just felt so privileged to be there and just sat with them. It was such great chats, and the folk were so friendly and so funny. There was, I think the cafe owner was from Denmark, I believe. That could be wrong, but you had just all these different voices and these different backgrounds, and it was great. I wrote that one up, and that was lovely. And then my second one that comes to mind is piece I did with two young activists, because after being in the job for a while, I really noticed the average age of the people in the room, and it's all about the time they have to give it, the urgency they feel, things like that. So to talk to these young activists and kind of ask them, why are you not out doing it? How do you feel about it all? And one of the boys, he said to me, I'd be happy if my grandchildren see independence. And he's 17. And I thought,
get a move on.
But I thought, I've not heard that. And all these months, people are, in the next few years, and he's saying in the next few decades. And I thought that the urgency that's up the generation, some people in generations just don't feel it. And then climate change came into it.
Yeah.
We look for climate change, and I think that's something to definitely be explored so much more. And we always talk about how independence, it's all interconnected, but I don't know how much environment is connected and if it should be more and things like that. But I believe that's a job for the Greens maybe, but
It's probably a job for all of us, and that's fascinating just hearing it like that, because one of the things that we've talked about before, the last time I saw a lot of young people really enthusiastic and together, well, 2 occasions. One was COP26 in Glasgow, and the other one was the Power to the People rally outside of Scottish Power. And that was sparked off by the cost of living. And it was a lot of young people there. I mean, studentish maybe, in early 20s, I would say. Possibly there was people with kids in prams, people who were being affected by the situation and the cost of living. I could imagine why a lot of young people aren't sitting around talking about abstract concepts like independence, but they surely are aware of things like the climate and the cost of living and their prospects and the EU and their access to job markets. That's what's real about it. And that's why it's urgent as well. They can't wait 3 decades.
One of the things we were wondering, and I think that leads into it, one of the things we were wondering, Laura, was, does the National do any research into, who reads the paper? And I mean, is it all people who are pretty well convinced about Indy? I mean, I guess that's always going to make up the majority of your readership and listenership, but do you have any kind of figures on that? Because those points that Fiona was just making, that if younger people are understandably more concerned perhaps about climate change and not seeing the potential for what Scotland could do as an independent country, that would be an interesting whole area to explore. But anyway, that's what we were wondering, if you have any, if you do any research on that.
I think we're going through a market research thing at the moment where we're asking folk to do surveys, and that's readership. From what I've seen is it is people who are convinced, it's people who are older, and
young people aren't reading papers full stop, are they?
Well, there's that, yeah.
And we have an app, but it's going through a lot of development at the moment, so it's just these things take time, and obviously as a company to try and keep up with all these digital things, it's like, you've got to move fast, but it takes money, and to keep the digitalization of everything is so fast and immediate that young people just go for it straight away for the thing that's ready, and to try and be that thing that's ready is really difficult to keep them that readership. It's also swayed more towards mail.
See, the mail thing, we do stuff for Independence Live. We've also got our own YouTube channel, Scottish Independence Podcasts. And on Independence Live, most of the presenters are male as well. Whereas our YouTube show, not only if we've got 2 female presenters, we tend to have a lot more women guests on. And we're just back from Perth. And that was at the invitation of Jackie at the Perth Hub. And she said she spotted me and Marlene somewhere on YouTube, and she couldn't believe that there were women of her age talking to them. And suddenly that encouraged her to get involved. And we've had that feedback a few different places, haven't we? That because they see somebody that they can relate to, I think.
There's a reason Women for Independence are out there,
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's definitely necessary. And going back to the undecided thing, I don't think our print gets to anyone who's undecided primarily, unless it features on stalls for yes stalls. The physical paper doesn't get much, but then when it comes to who's reading it online, we couldn't track that. We couldn't see who that is. But our readership last year was 2 million a month on digital. That's not circulation. I don't think any
no.
print circulation of 2 million. But online it was 2 million, and now it's getting towards 3 million the average per month. So
is that like views? So it could be me going on 10 times.
It could be you doing it a million times.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But that's
pretty respectable. That's pretty good, isn't it?
One of the things we spoke about with John when we were speaking to him was about, although they might not be buying the paper, seeing it in a shop on a stand with other papers, anybody can see that, and whether you might vehemently disagree with what's on the front stall. But we were talking about how it's more likely than not that there either isn't a national in display at all because they don't have one, or because somebody's hidden it. You know? And that's a little battle that goes on. I mean, I do it the other way around. I'm sure you
Yes,
do too,
so do
Maureen,
I.
don't you? Stick it on the Express or the Telegraph. But in order to do
I'm
that,
not actually formally admitting to having done it. Actually,
No,
Yes,
and
exactly.
but it is something that I might think about. Yeah.
I'm just having a hallucination.
You just want to get it front and center. You just want to, even if they don't buy it, it's just like, we're here.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly,
Even if
exactly.
and even if it's not there, I mean, we're just saying that the business model is ridiculous. That half the country want independence, and yet of the everything on the newsstand, you would think that the only news that matters comes from the country next door, and it's Tory right-wing migrant-hating shite. You know, that is wall to wall what you can see. So even seeing a little bit in the middle, in a corner, under an Express that says something different is worthwhile. So, I mean, it's worth it. Even I wondered, though, whether, maybe going off on a complete tangent, but, you know, if visibility of that kind of thing is what is useful, do you have poster campaigns and things? Is there visible stuff other than what's on the newsstand that's not online? Because those communities we need to get to, those demographics, are still the older ones.
I remember that we did billboards. So I've only been at the National for a year now, and I believe they did billboards before I joined. But I do know that also we do run radio advertising. Yeah.
I mean, one of the other things that the National has sometimes done is call a sort of pull-out thing on a specific topic, and then made that available to yes groups. Well, certainly, I know at one point I'd arranged for a whole bundle. It was a very big bundle actually to get delivered to our front doorstep, and then for me to pass on to pensioners for indie stalls down in Glasgow, and wasn't there one done? Believe in Scotland or Business in Scotland, yeah, and that was. I mean, I was involved in putting those through the doors. It wasn't a national edition, but it's got plenty of information about the National on it. So that must get into people's houses that wouldn't necessarily go and pick it up off.
For sure. And I think that's another thing. We also try and be a resource. Yeah, because then other supplements have been the Macron Report one.
Yeah,
we did
some myth-busting one as well. That was really good.
And we did one for EU as well this anniversary, and we'll be hoping to do some more with the days of action that are going on. And that's not even just, so it's not maybe sometimes a resource just for yes groups to sort of understand the information. It's also something that they can order and pass on at their stalls and then put through doors.
One of the things that crossed our mind was that, the National's owned by NewsQuest, which also runs the Herald. I don't know what else it runs.
So, it runs a lot.
So I don't know, maybe if you even share the building somewhere. So you've got the National and then the Herald, and is that, what's the dynamics like? Or are there dynamics, or can you tell us about them?
Oh, can I tell them much? That's the most important question. No, we do. We have a building in Glasgow, and Herald are on the ground floor, and we're on the second floor, so we have to climb the stairs. But we're it's often when we approach certain digital marketing, or at one point this year we've recorded some videos that you might see embedded in our articles by our journalists, sort of saying, I'm Laura, I report on grassroots, I have this newsletter, you can subscribe, things like that. It's just to sort of give a face to this print. And when we did them, the Herald did them as well. And it wasn't like someone idea. It was like, right, we're doing this for one, we'll do it for the other. So we're sort of on an even playing field in terms of sales and revenue and things like that. But our audiences are totally different. So at that point, you've then got to totally change the way we do things. And we also share an office with the Glasgow Times. And we have Rangers Review and Celtic Way as well, the Scottish Farmer. So the building is quite small, but we've got a lot in there.
So do you have complete editorial control over what you put in the National? Because it's owned by...
Yeah, I know. I've had that question before, and it's quite. I would love, unfortunately, just due to everything, you can't bring a reader into your newsroom and just say, just watch, But if we could, you would literally just see us go. If something happens, we go, right, let's do it. There's no. I don't think there's ever been a conversation, at least whilst I've been there in the last year, where someone from higher up has said you cannot print that. It's never happened, and we just try to do everything balanced. But it's when it comes to independence, it's always there's never a question of NewsQuest who may own something somewhere that is unionist or whatever. If they don't like that, we couldn't do. That's never the thing. So I think we're in a really privileged position to do it.
Yeah. That's really good to know. It's reassuring, isn't it?
And I mean, actually, if the National and the Herald are on, equivalent in terms of revenue and everything, that does give you some leverage, doesn't it? It's,
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we're valued. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I do remember also that a lot of people have this they did have an impression that we were quite attached to SNP, and that is again not the case. I do remember when there was one of the arrests, I was the only one on the news desk. It was a Saturday, I think, and I was the only one there. And someone had commented online saying, oh, you probably had to go to your higher ups or the SNP and check you could print it. I was like, I was in my pajamas, drinking my coffee. No, I talked to no one, and I just got it up. So it's. I think people forget it's actually just someone at the laptop doing this.
Yes.
We get the same thing as well, because we make it an absolute point that we're not party political. We're passionate about independence. I'm not in any party, there's absolutely no adherence to any particular thing. And yet you get people all the time calling us either ALBA mouthpieces or SNP mouthpieces, or but you like those Greens, and but you're for this. And you think, how can we simultaneously be all these things? And then I thought, is that not what the BBC, that's their excuse, isn't it? That if they're annoying everybody equally, they must be doing something right.
Right. But it is interesting, isn't it? It's like, as you say, there you are with your cup of coffee and your pajamas and your laptop, and you get the article out. I mean, people of a certain age, a lot older than you, Laura, but more like me, and we sort of go back to, like the films about Watergate and the Washington Post, and it all had to get run through in front of the editor, and then the owner had to get brought in. So we've probably come from
chain smoking
and a whole different kind of mythic kind of context for it. But what is it? What's it like though when, if you see a story? There's an umpteen example, like ferries is one, it's like, but ferry. Oh, there's the one that's on the go, actually, I think, that, again, really recently, is about the alcohol pricing. It's like I saw BBC Scotland doing a thing that on the news programme at lunchtime, and we were just saying, well, the evidence is in and it is making a difference, and now there's a push to put the minimum price higher, a bit higher again. And I'm watching the BBC Scotland going, when this was coming through, you kept doing stories about how it would be a disaster, and the kind of other side to the story, anything to kind of say that the Scottish government were, off the wall. So what's it like for you if you see a story that, it might not be in the National, but how you would write it, and then it appears in the Scotsman or the Herald with a much more of a unionist slant to it. What's that like?
Yeah, that's happened, and it's got much more of a unionist slant, and I think it's also, you can have which side it is, the negative, the positive, but then actually it's, then it's thinking, actually turn that round and then go, right, are you being reactive? Are you trying to push a narrative? Who's saying this? Is it you, or is someone actually saying this? And I think that we try and really, based on reports and committees and businesses, people who it affects, and not try and push the narrative and try and actually keep it balanced, whether or not it's positive or negative in terms of Scottish Government or SNP or whoever it may be, or independence. But it's because you can't, people are too smart.
It's facts as well. Yeah. We came across a site just yesterday, actually. It was called Ground.news, and it rates all the different newspapers according to where their you know, are they left, are they right, are they centre, and how factual they are. And the National is highly factual. What's that word they used? It was
factuality.
Factuality. It's got high factuality. I mean, I don't think it's a word, but you know, that's a really good tribute to say you have a partisan, you know, focus in that it's an independence focus, and yet you're still able to put reliable facts. And if you look at, what was the other one we looked at? The Evening Times, and that was mildly factitious. What was the word?
Factuality.
Factuality.
It was mixed factuality or something like that.
Mixed.
Something.
And I mean, when I get a minute, I'm going to go through them all and just see what they are. But the other thing it does is it'll show you the same story, you know, in all the different places it's appeared, and a summary of here's the right-wing version, here's the left-wing version. And I thought, well, what a useful, they're not paying us, by the way, but, you know, what a useful thing to actually have, because otherwise you get an idea of what flavour certain papers are. It is quite nice that you actually get that kind of coverage. I hope that people outside the National, even if they maybe don't agree with independence, you'd like to think they at least respect the journalism.
Yeah, definitely. And I actually used to work in a newsagent's. My first ever job was paper girl, and which is a great full circle moment. And then I worked in a newsagent's, and I would put out the papers in the morning, and I would read them, and you could really, to have all of those free right there instead of just the online stuff. I quite well understand now the actual readership that they have, because they would literally come into the newsagents and buy them. So I was able to get to know them and actually know why they're buying this paper, what they are looking for. And I always imagine those faces now when I think of those papers.
When you're saying that you've got complete freedom on what you print, I don't think that can be the case for the BBC journalists. Do you think that they are pursuing an agenda, aren't they?
Yeah, and actually, you know, being at events that they have also covered, and, you know, talking to them, I kind of sometimes want to question, like, how can you do it?
Yeah.
How can you do it, and how can you, you know, and even how can you do it and happily be called out by folk online and be so transparent about it and be seen to be doing it and still do it?
I know.
They definitely do not have control over it, and it's really. I mean, you know, we saw that about the story about BBC boss telling the journalist not to investigate or fact check the bus. You know, they were told no, and they didn't do it, and it's just this. Couldn't do it.
And if they are 50-50 like the rest of the population, at least some of the people in there probably are yes supporters. And that must be an awful working environment to actually be in. Having to pretend, I suppose. I mean, I'm sure some of them, you know, it must be genuine, their absolute loathing. It just seeps out of every pore. But I'm sure, I think some of the others must be very torn about having.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is interesting, as you say, like Laura, it is interesting, isn't it? Just how can they? That's the question I've wondered. I thought, how are you doing it? It's you're Scottish, you know what we think. We've grown up in the same kind of with the same set of social assumptions and visions and things. You know that, and yet I've just heard you kind of say that. And you know, I mean, there are some Scottish, well, not just the Scots who are in the BBC Scotland or elsewhere. I mean, but you know, you think they're good journalists. It would just be great. You know, there's certainly some of them that you kind of think, well, once we are independent, I really hope that they stick around in Scotland and they kind of help build up a much more vibrant and, you know, ethically kind of based media for us, because we certainly need it.
I have to say, I don't like that aggressive, finger pointy, interrupty style that a lot of them have got. And I don't mind people asking searching questions, and if I'd like them to ask searching questions, at least let them give you an answer. It's very macho, again, that kind of aggressive stuff.
Have we got any other questions?
Yeah, what kind of stories are most successful?
It's media. It's pointing out when Scotland's been had, you know. Yeah, definitely. It's if there's been a columnist who has said something that is just not accurate or not on, It's when the BBC make a mistake, or even just mistakes that are massive in terms of, especially around DRS, when a lot of the misinformation was around and things like that. But then sometimes when it's something like the weather, last week, I'm not sure if you saw,
yes, I saw that, yeah.
It was awful. And so it's sometimes...
Oh, wait a minute. Tell me what that was, because I was on Cana. I didn't see any TV. What was that?
So it was BBC Weather. They had Kirkwall where Lerwick should be, and then Lerwick where Kirkwall should be. I always thought it was just a template, so who was playing about with it and why? It wasn't the best. I'm not sure. They did have a response, so probably check out the website and see what they say. Yeah, so it's things like that. And then after that, people really want to hear about the islands. It's islands, and especially at the moment, possibly to do with mostly a lot of the ferries, but the islands, business in the islands. We have had 2 comment pieces by Rhonda Meek they've flown on the site. One of them about sort of the tourist image of Scotland that's being sold, and then the second one on the housing crisis in the islands. And second homes, and both of those, and it's not just and we can see where people are reading things from and where they're coming from, and it's not just online, it's from Google. So those things are, people are clicking on them and finding them. They could be searching, Scotland holiday, and they can see that. So it's things like that I think are getting seen from further afield.
That's where what title you have for an article can have a big effect. If someone's just Googling, Google will pick up some things depending on on what the article's called or the title of it's called. Yeah, we
kind of try and find something for our monthly video show that we do for Independence Live that's topical, but it does tend to fall into that kind of infrastructure heading. There's a lot of it, and land reform is another one that keeps coming up. We've covered Loch Lomond about 3 times, and it's fascinating where the interest lies, and that's not necessarily where you would think it lies. If you read The Guardian, for example, if you click on their Scotland section, you get ptarmigans.
Or you get how much more house you can buy for your buck if you move to Scotland. I absolutely hate that stuff.
Or the islands for sale.
Second homes and stuff.
I just go, stop it. We just stop it. This isn't the kind of Scotland that we want. We are so much more. I mean, I know it's beautiful, and I can be driving around Scotland and be almost in tears sometimes. It's so beautiful, but that's we've got a hell of a lot more to us than that. And it so irritates me. Do you think Constitution's something that the paper might pick up, because it's a bit in the news at the moment, and we've done a couple of programs.
We've done a few on that.
Well, 2 in particular, 2 mainly, one with Mike Russell, one with Elliot Bulmer, but others where it's been part of the interview, and it's come to the fore again. Actually, in some ways you can kind of go, oh, constitutional, just boring, but actually you're also writing down what your vision for your nation.
You're designing a new country. How much bigger does it get than that? Your own society. So I think it's fascinating.
Do you think that might be picked up with by the paper?
Yeah, no, I think it's again, as someone who studied history, it's really not. I don't find it boring, but sometimes sometimes it's our editor and our management team, like they're fantastic, and sometimes you can be really interested in something as an individual, and actually then they have to say, remember the readership might not be good. There's been quite a few things, and it can be something so, I think at one point I remember someone had flagged something to do with a band coming to Scotland, and they were like, oh, breaking news, and we were all like, not quite. So Constitution, again, I think there's a segment that at the moment are so interested in it because it's fascinating, it's niche, it's so many layers that you can just dissect and just see so much. But in general election time, post general election, I think it's going to be so high on the agenda. So I think we're definitely going to be. I mean, we already have every Sunday.
You got John Drummond, haven't you?
Exactly. So but that will definitely ramp up, and those sort of stuff does do well already, actually, and as well as currency. So The sort of like you say, the infrastructure behind all of this, it's definitely of note. But I think, when it's in mainstream media, that's when folk will be.
Yes.
Yeah. There's one question we did want to ask you, and it just was about, like you've got TV listings.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way that they could do sort of, there's Broadcasting Scotland, there's Independence Live, there's our stuff, there's various other, groups have scheduled things. Leslie Riddick podcast goes out on Tuesday, ours goes out on Friday, Scotonomics. Could you have a kind of listing of here's what's on this week?
Well, that actually, I think I started this job in August, and in September, I went round to everyone, and I met Broadcasting Scotland, and I talked to them, and I was talking to Kevin, and I was talking to TNT Live, and I was talking to Kildone Radio. No one had their stuff quite in a schedule that we could do.
I can believe that. Yeah.
So it was really difficult, and Broadcasting Scotland especially, because getting it out mostly every day at 7, and then if not, it's because of technical issues or staffing issues for that to be happening. And I was so annoyed that we couldn't get it together. And I talked to everyone as well, so I felt really guilty because I could see the stuff that was getting churned out, and it's not average, it's not amateur, it's it's stuff that has to be heard and should be highlighted. So we really tried, but it wasn't doable. If
we know we've got a show coming up, say we've got a new video, maybe it's coming out the next week, or it's just been broadcast, is there a way that could be?
Do you know your notice board column? Because we know what the podcasts are going to be for the next month. Could that go in with that?
Because the notice board is for live events, but it's also for online. So I don't see, and it's events, but it's, we had the declaration of Arbroath there for the whole month, so I don't see why we couldn't put or even I could talk to my editor about actually making a section at the bottom. Yeah. And even if it's not a full TV listing sort of page, it could just be that section for podcasts.
But I think that's covered everything we had and a bit more. So thank you so much for that. That was really fascinating.
It's really good to chat to you. Yeah.
Thanks, Laura.
Bye.
I really enjoyed talking to Laura, wasn't it? It was just fascinating getting a bit of a sense of what goes on behind the scenes, as it were.
Yeah. Wasn't it interesting?
It was really good, wasn't it? And she certainly clarified some things about their editorial independence. But it was just actually really good talking to her and getting a sense of what made her take up that job.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And wouldn't it be nice? I don't know if there are any supermarket buyers watching this, but if there are, could you please make sure you order enough copies of the National, because it's very hard to get hold of, and you've got half a country that you're not serving their needs for.
Yeah. That's the point, isn't it? Half the country. Half the country is not getting its needs met, apart from one newspaper which you're not stocking. Waitrose,
Sainsbury's, Asda, Tesco.
Yep. So just come on, get your act together, folks.
That should do it.